Welcome, everyone, to another special episode of Jews on Film, the podcast where we look at films both old and new through our unique Jewish lens. I'm Harry Adensasser, and I'm your Jewish film podcaster.
And I'm Daniel Zana. I'm a documentary filmmaker, a video editor, and I'm really excited to welcome our guest today, who is the director of the Arts and Ideas Festival, as well as the Seattle Jewish Film Festival, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year and is running from March 22nd to April 6th this year in Seattle, Washington. Pamela Lavitt, welcome back to Jews on Film.
Hey, glad to be here.
We're so excited. Congratulations. 30 years is like a huge achievement to celebrate, so congrats.
Thank you. Only been here for 20 of it, but nonetheless, the founders made it possible.
Yeah. So of your 20 years in your tenure, are there any notable moments that stick out to you?
You know, it's funny. I've been looking kind of through the archives, trying to pull up images, all the trailers. In fact, we actually launched our archive. It'll be launching on Saturday. If you go to seattlejff.org, you actually can hit archive and look at all of our programs for 30 years. We actually skipped 1 year, 1997. I have no idea why, but it was an upstart festival in 1995. They probably just needed to regroup and figure out how the interest was so great. It started off, as this tiny little series at the Grand Illusion Cinema. And the next thing we know, we were at the King Cat Theater with, 700 people. So it was a big beginning, and they needed to figure it out. For me personally, there are a couple of moments, and part of that going backwards is seeing the people that we've lost, seeing the moments where things are inflection points in our history together. I would say one of the biggest and most important moments for me was my first year as the director of the festival, inviting the Academy Award nominated director, Michael Verhoeven from Munich, to the festival. He was our first Real Difference Award winner. And of course, many of you know, or perhaps those of us that follow the cinema, he was the conscience of German cinema. His film Nasty Girl was nominated, I think, in 1997 for an Academy Award. It never made it into U.S. distribution. And he died last year. And just the conscience of German cinema, this German master of cinema. And Nasty Girl, we played it at the Cinerama with about 400 people, but we also showed his next film, Human Failure, was sort of the documentary version of it. But this was the most amazing moment. We had to get these major, huge 35 millimeter platters from, Italy or wherever the film played last. And somebody had by accident wound one of the platters backwards. So we actually used it for our Film Talks program, and we wanted students to see the story of a student who had written a paper about, the Nazis had actually been in her town, despite the town telling everybody that they had not had anything to do with this. And her paper makes some nasty things happen for her. And he was up in the booth at Cinerama, like looking at the each 35 millimeter, celluloid to try to figure out how to correct this problem. It was probably only about 20 minutes of the film. The students were great. Warren Etheridge was interviewing him, but his generosity of spirit and his brilliance was just, he didn't care. He was there to talk with the students that we brought. We did a program called Film Talks where the students during the day from schools all over got to see it. So that is a very cherished moment in my experience. I think the only other thing I would say, because there's so many along the way, is seeing filmmakers return and seeing them with their first film, seeing them kind of barely, self-distributing, and then the next thing they know, we can barely get them here, I also think that a lot of the times that first film is their 8-year journey. And, Laura Bialis, for example, did the film Refusnik, which was funded in part by the Henry M. Jackson Foundation. So it had a local connection to Scoop Jackson and the history of the Jewish involvement in the Refusnik movement here. And then next thing you know, Laura's bringing back Rock the Red Zone. And then she's coming back with her next film. She gets married and goes to Israel. And so, her film, of course, Vishniak was in our film, was here last year. So, it starts off with a lot of access to people. Hopefully they become more like Michael Verhoeven and they just are very accomplished, but give of their generosity. But for me, it's a lot of the filmmakers who feel that this festival is a really important one to be at and continue to show their films at. So those are a few of my moments.
Those are some great recollections. Yeah.
What I find so remarkable about that answer is it just goes to it. I think it really is a testament to what doing this festival for 30 years truly means, to have people that come back and return. I mean, we've been doing this podcast just to compare it to ourselves for a moment, and you're one of our return guests. And there's something about, it becomes more of an institution that people go back to when something endures for 30 years and has this legacy. And as you're telling that story about Michael Verhoeven and kind of stitching back together the 35 millimeter, what I'm thinking is, cinema has changed over the last 30 years, and you've been present to, years of just changes in trends and technology and all of that.
Well, I would say our archive exists of trailers that I had to convert from beta. I had to digibeta, then it went beta to digibeta. It all taught how format, like we had this machine in the back of Mohai that they had to switch the subtitles with, and like the panic, even up to that 35 millimeter moment was huge. Now it's the digital download is so much easier. Yep. But I did want to share just two other things, because we've also invited into the festival filmmakers whose presence makes a film Jewish. And, you talk about the Jewish lens for your podcast. That was a long time. One of our taglines for the festival was, cinema through a Jewish lens. But we've had, like, Andy Schocken did an Academy Award nominated film, and he grew up here on Mercer Island, and he did an amazing film also about music in India, but that was his first feature length documentary. But he did a film about the former governor of the state of Washington who had Parkinson's disease. And, it was such a pleasure to invite him into the festival to talk about being the wedding bar mitzvah videographer for Sam Strom of the Strom Jewish Community Center, as the way he got his beginning. Same with like Michael Ben Arroyo, who did, The Words, of course, Zoe Zaldana and, Bradley Cooper starring in that one. And he was one of our Real Difference Award winners. And he talked about the mountains of the Pacific Northwest as inspiring the way that his cinematic sensibility of space and, slowness and admiring the Pacific Northwest culture really influenced a different type of cinematic timing. So there are moments too where you realize how much the Pacific Northwest has influenced people that are doing work that doesn't always make it into our festival, but sometimes we invite them back.
That all is really fascinating. You've shared with us so much about the past 30 years of this festival, but we wanted to shift it a little bit to this year's festivities. What can people expect from the slate of films and events playing at SJFF this year?
Oh my goodness. So first of all, there's form and there's content. And I would say form has been also, it used to be, well, what kind of platform are you showing on? Well, now it's like in-person versus virtual and hybrid. And what does it mean to, a lot of festivals have retracted since 2020. We are actually, this poster behind me here is the Silver Screen Anniversary 25th. It never happened. We were canceled 3 days before when Jay Inslee announced the COVID closures, and, Elliot Gould was our guest, and we had a lot of really amazing 25th anniversary things planned. Do people care about a 30th anniversary? I'm not sure, but we decided, first of all, we needed to get people continuing as much as they like still the pleasure of their couch to come out. So we have 30 films for 30 years. We have 22 feature length in-person films. I'm sorry, one of those is our shorts program. We are showing in 5 cinemas, not only our own, we're showing at Majestic Bay and Walla Walla, and we're starting to expand the festival's footprint again. And we're sort of testing to see, will they come and what does it take? Because we thought at first, a year or two out of the pandemic, everything had to have food and more dancing and music. And if the film doesn't get them out, maybe these will. And I think people are kind of ready. We're on standby already for one. We added an extra screening. So I guess now we're 23 films in person. We're bringing back the Fiddler on the Roof sing along. Yeah, Sif does it with Chinese food in the movie, but we're like, we own this. We got to own this again. Blintzes and borscht is more of our deal. I think that part of it is the form is that we're moving more to in-person. We're de-emphasizing the virtual, but there still is a split. Our patrons have aged just with the festival since 2020, since the 25th. Some people are just going to stay at home, and we want to reach them, families with young kids, adults, people with ambulatory challenges. Like, this is our mission to reach them. And so we will do it. In terms of the theme, the Pearl anniversary, we've been through a very difficult year. The Jewish community, wherever you are along a spectrum of how challenging it's been, I think it just really resonated with this idea. Despite how unkosher the clamshell is, you can actually enjoy a pearl. And we really wanted to celebrate how things, irritants, adversity, pressure, the depths of the ocean, the depths of despair, that you can shed light on something that can be transformed into beauty. And that's really coming together to learn and grow. We do have a couple of films that do address October 7th. Mostly those are expanding to more universal values, even though it's very important that we commemorate, we honor, we support the hostages' releases and their families, that these films are about empathy and wider perspectives. So I think the Ode to Humanity, the Beethoven's 9 Ode to Humanity, and Torn are much more about the broader concepts of what's happened culturally and more in the zeitgeist of the moment beyond just the October 7th importance of talking that through at a Jewish film festival.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned before, just, about how much has gone on in the past couple of years. And I wanted to know, you mentioned a few, but are you starting to see, generally speaking, a lot more of the events from the past few years being folded into the films?
When you say events, you mean like the events of the day out in the world?
Yeah, kind of like reflections of what's going on in the Jewish world, seeing that being reflected out into cinema.
Obviously, we have our tragedies, right? And there's so many submissions that are about that depth part of that pearl, right? It's and Jewish film festivals, we try to disabuse the world that's not Jewish. We're not just about the morose and the dark and the drama. We are people of humor. Right. We like our comedies, but sometimes they're hard to find. It's hard to find a family film. These are hard things. But I do think that there were a lot of films that probably started shooting before October 7th. And suddenly there's a coda at the end of the film. The filmmakers knew that the script had to be rewritten in some way. So at the end, they kind of went in and did that. I can't name the films that we didn't program, but I would say that there was a lot of really quality films about really important subjects that had to rewrite their scripts literally. And I felt bad. I felt like, oh my gosh, you just spent a life's work following, this Palestinian and this Israeli individual, and suddenly this changes your whole narrative of their relationship. So I think that we recognize that there was a scramble, and we saw a lot of that. I would say that kind of like you mentioned, a real pain is that the next generation, the second generation conversations are much different than the ones that we saw 10 years ago, which was just let me bring grandma back to her home kind of thing. Now it's this next generation interpreting Holocaust tourism or, the kitschy parts of Poland, right? And I think that Welcome to Yiddishland in the festival this year is a converted spirit of that to some extent, because the largest place where Jews are living in Europe is in Krakow and in Berlin, and that's where all the klezmer musicians live, right? So they're producing amazing work, but it's not a typical film that we would normally see about a subject of Yiddish, for example. It's about the artists that are performing. Yeah.
I think that comparison to next generation Holocaust cinema is very apt because, we've discussed this in the past, but film is a medium that takes, years usually to produce a movie. And it's not something of instant reactions. Like sometimes we enjoy having a podcast because it enables us to. And obviously in the wake of October 7th, in the last couple of years, you've seen so many different, takes come out there. But it's so interesting to put that in the context of the life cycle of a movie. That example you were giving of that movie, following the Palestinian and the Israeli character. But even just any of these stories kind of, you have almost the benefit of needing more time to flesh out ideas that I find movies can be often reflective on and maybe benefit from, a couple of years removal in a way that some other art forms don't. So we're only a couple of years out from this, and I'm sure there will be cinema defining it over the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years. I mean, who knows what the near future holds for us, but it is interesting to see the way it's already starting to color some of the movies that are part of your festival.
Absolutely.
You think about like the Holocaust, like the number of Holocaust films we've covered over the however many episodes, like, but you think about like an earlier attempt at, discussing post-trauma with like The Pawnbroker, where it's like very close to the event itself. And we're still talking about it in different ways with A Real Pain or other movies like that. And so, but everybody approaches it kind of from a different angle and has something different to say. And I do think that we are in for a lot of reflection, a lot of meditation on kind of like the events that have been going on and being able to approach things, whether it's in documentary format and comedy and narratives and drama, all sorts of things. There's a lot of different ways to slice this up and to discuss it.
I think your metaphor of slicing is exactly right. I think there is a shift, as Harry said, that and Danielle, you mentioned that we used to say, okay, what slice of the Holocaust are we receiving this year? It's a little jaded to say that, right? And some of it is really good, and some of it is kind of on the schlocky side because conflict, the basic theory of drama, if you've read any books about drama, is like, where's the love, where's the conflict? Well, it's like packed in before you even start minute one. If it's set in the Holocaust, you're there already and it's invested. But it would be is this the lesbian version? Is this the clown who survived through his comedy version? It was literally like, it was the lesbian, the gay men version. Like it just became the Hungarian family, the Chinese family in Shanghai. Like it was literally like, what spectrum? Then it was the animated feature of those that went to Shanghai version produced by China. I mean, there's so many slices of it. And I think that we're going to see that a little bit with the more contemporary things that are happening in this current climate. And hopefully, I don't see those as happening as narrative necessarily, but their testimony. I've been taking a class on Israeli cinema and Israeli literature, and the one section about October 7th, it was just so clear, like Harry said, it had no perspective yet. It was just raw emotion, and all the rest of the poetry felt like poetry. So hopefully we'll see more of that, post Adorno, unfortunately, but like the poetry returning to that experience in the cinematic depth and distance that people have.
I'm always curious and interested in sort of seeing how people take on conflict and like I think of Waltz with Bashir, which is like a very unique way to like take a documentary of people's reflections on war, animate it, make it larger than life, make it truly unique in some ways, and have a lot to say, which is so I am excited to see what people are able to come up with from these unfortunate events, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the most precious of cargoes this year, the animated feature that premiered at Cannes, that was the second film to be nominated for Palme d'Or for an animated film since Waltz with Bashir, to me is also a very unique example of a slice of a story like that is, and it's like next level, it's totally next level. So separating the good from the schlock is really what we do with 300 films coming in and a lot of committee members, 1,000 something reviews are submitted. And I get lucky that I get to see the stuff that sifts up, or I already have relationships with people that are supporting, because they're looking at more of this. When you ask me, they're seeing more of this than I am. Obviously this year, the film festival, really, we saw that there was a lot about music and the joy of music kind of coming through. And so we have the Music Maven series and, Art Spiegelman, and focusing on art and creativity and the transformation of things in social justice to music is something we really wanted to put out. We found more and more that the community is dictating to us that they want to come to this festival because they're experiencing Jewish joy. So it gets harder and harder to actually show those more poignant, dark films. I mean, I think about Fateless. I don't know if you ever saw Fateless, but, it's 3-hour film. It's, Claus Landsman's film, Shoah. Like, these are films that are rigorous, even The Brutalist. These are rigorous films that take a long time for people to experience. And for whatever reason, at least in Seattle, our Jewish film community is they might go see it elsewhere. And they are sometimes going there first, but they're sort of a little less interested seeing them in their joyful Jewish space. They want more levity. That's what they've been asking for in their surveys for the last few years.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really, really love that focus on Jewish joy. And, as we're talking about the way some of these, these current events are being processed, it's natural to me that there's this raw response, then there's this kind of distance and seeking for joy. And then, hopefully when we have this conversation again around the 50th Seattle Jewish Film Festival, we can talk about some of the more reflective pieces. But you just mentioned The Brutalist, and we wanted to end with a final question based on an observation that Daniel and I had. We noted this in our end-of-year Oyster special, which we encourage audiences who haven't heard yet to check out. But we mentioned that it does feel like some of the biggest movies this year dealt with characters and ideas that were particularly Jewish. You mentioned The Brutalist. We also spoke about A Real Pain in this conversation. There's the movie Between the Temples that also explored very particular Jewish ideas. And we just wanted to know, did you find this trend as well in your movie-going experience this past year? And, what would you make of that mini trend? Why are there so many Jews on our screen all of a sudden?
Or is it just us, with our glasses?
No, I think it's just you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
all right. Great conversation.
Yeah.
It's such a good question. And I'm not sure that it's like a zero sum yes or no. I think I've struggled for years trying to advise people what is a Jewish film. I know you in this podcast grapple with that, the sensibility stuff, the filmmaker, the speaker who comes and illuminates the information. I would say that, it's a little like New York Times Yiddish. Like, we've got like 5 words that people can say without italicizing. Like, I think that there's a little bit of that in the cinema too. Like, if there's something schmoozy about it, or something schleppy about it, like, we've got a couple of things that are considered. I will say, don't want to diss anybody, but like, we showed Between the Temples off season and people hated that film. There were so many, and same with The Brutalist. Like, these are very divisive in terms of love-hate relationships.
Sure.
And I know you've asked the question even of like Daniel Robbins' film, like, is it good for the Jews, right? There are some people that just can't stand negative depictions of themselves in cinema. Mm-hmm. And like, whatever, there's I can't remember the scholar, her name is Davis, but she said, like, we know when we're no longer immigrants, when we can laugh at ourselves. And the thing is that we're a lot more complex than just this immigrant generation, like looking at our former selves and laughing at it. But I think there's something about Jewish comedy or humor, or what is it that we feel comfortable with publicly in the world. And in this festival, we tend to show like grittier things because we sometimes are like, we want to grapple with these images ourselves. I think Bad Shabbos is a really good example because while it has all the star power and it's selling like hotcakes, it is probably more negative depiction of Jews in our festival this year. And the question I think people are asking of some of these other films are, what makes Barat palatable? People got really angry sitting and watching Barat play in public theaters because they felt like, I own the ability to laugh at this person, you don't. And it was divisive for people in the public sphere. I think the stuff that's crossing over to the public is maybe less Jewish, or it has a bone of Jewish in it. But we put in this festival stuff that amplifies profound connections to something Jewish, and it could be, so it's got to have that new high water mark. It's not just, oh, they said Hanukkah, or
Right.
like the baseline of Woody Allen. It's got to do a little bit more work than that. And I think that there are a couple of films in the festival that barely squeak by, like Janice Ian, the Sherry and Lamb Chop. Like, these are icons in our history. And maybe they were civil rights activists or had Holocaust survivor parents, but those films are not particularly Jewish either. So we embrace some of it, but most of it has to do the work in our festival of making us feel more Jewishly aware or profoundly connected in some way. So that's the difference, I think, Harry, is the other films don't require you to have an identity crisis while you're sitting in the theater, I guess.
Yeah, I really do agree with you in that distinction. That's something that, it sounds like you do listen to our episodes, and I appreciate that, because we really try to interrogate movies. Are they window dressing their otherwise not Jewish story just to kind of, throw face? And I think as I've become a little bit more of an avid consumer of, Jewish films, Jewish content, I absolutely agree the bar is raised, that I'm looking for, what are you going to give me more than that? And, just to quote two of the movies that I mentioned in the question, A Real Pain, I do think it hits some profound level of, connection to our legitimate past, but it also does so through the voice of, a non-Jewish actor in Kieran Culkin. And that's something that I'm not on the surface kind of upset about, but also there was engagement and people discussed, his response in interviews, the way that he engaged with the material. It was just different. And, I think The Brutalist also is one that on some realms, I agree with you. I think it's an epic story about maybe creativity, and it doesn't always go to those depths of, the Jewish spirit, within it. I think there are some moments. There is some, I thought intentional use of, prayer sequences. There are specific prayers that they actually pull from the Yom Kippur services that I do think mirror ideas of confession and regret that did feel somewhat profound to me. But it is interesting not only to discuss, to really interrogate the actual Jewishness, but also to wonder about the impression of audiences to this. And our audience is watching it the same way that maybe an SJFF audience is going to watch these same movies and find them, different or upsetting in some ways.
But I think we have a long history, prima facie, like those films had a Jewish external character or something. But I think we have a tendency to read Jewish in things that aren't necessarily Jewish, or we come to the films.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
right? Big time.
So we have, we have The Pianist. Prior to this film, we're invested already in the actor, and we know he's got the chops to play a Jew, right? And you have Jesse Eisenberg wrote, directed, suddenly he's the ultimate neurotic update, of Jewishness. So I think that these are there's layers of context and maybe history before people even walk in the theater, that people are invested in the expressions of those that have already met the muster for Jewish content before they see the film. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is like refreshing to sort of see less coding. I feel like, these people are on the page very explicitly Jewish, like you were saying, Harry, A Real Pain. I have plenty of bones to pick. Like, the most knowledgeable character in that movie is a non-Jewish guy who's like a Sabinophile. And then with The Brutalist, like literally the Jewish guy gets screwed over big time. Anyway, I want to save that one for our episode, Harry, our 3-hour take on the film itself. But
is there an intermission?
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. The podcast intermission. We should plan that
one.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do always enjoy our conversations about Jewish film, and I would encourage everyone to go check out the Seattle Jewish Film Festival this year, the 30th anniversary. Congrats again. We'll put a link to the show notes of all the information regarding the festival. And there's lots of cool events, like you mentioned, Pamela. There's like filmmaker meetups. There's like Yiddish brunches and all sorts of good things. So if you're local in Seattle, or even if you're in the Pacific Northwest, or Harry, if you're in New York and you want to fly out to Seattle, you should come check it out. There's lots of good films, and we've done a couple other episodes featuring some folks, and so check those episodes out and listen to those and check out the conversations we've had with those, because it's a lot of good stuff in there, and really excited for folks to check out the film. So Pamela, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. Thanks.
Really fun to talk Jewish film with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Daniel Zana and Harry Ottensasser. Daniel and Harry edited this episode. Follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.